Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, I better check the calendars to make sure. Yes, Friday. Good. That feels like one, I guess. Friday, January 29th, 2021. And I guess that's really something. It's been a long time since Friday just, felt like Friday, and that was it. Pretty good. I guess that's actually progress in the Biden era. We have another weekend to look forward to. Looks like it's going to be a little bit brisk, a little chilly, maybe. Or maybe where you are, if you're in the eastern half of the United States, you're experiencing a little cold snap as well. We'll get a little bit of snow. That'll be nice. Everything will look white and wintry as we sit in our houses for what's going to be coming up on a full year of more or less of lockdown social distancing, at the very least. We never did get off of that term, social distancing. Remember that way back in the beginning of the pandemic, we were trying to look for some sort of different terminology that they thought that maybe social distancing wasn't the right term. Greg mentioned it at some point, that maybe we ought to be talking about physical distancing, because it was still the idea of calling it social distancing still seemed to give people the idea that they could gather in groups, but distance from perhaps a little bit from one another or from other groups or something. I don't know. And eventually it didn't cause too much of a problem, except we never did really go through with the social distancing thing. And now a year later, we are still stuck in the middle of the pandemic. So happy Friday, everybody. Otherwise, a relatively normal era. Now we have the work ahead of us of course, correcting our course. Biden administration hard at work on doing their best to get vaccines distributed. A little bit of pushback I see out there from, I don't know, perhaps the medical or epidemiological community, sub-community of the medical community, about the Biden plans and revisions of the Trump plans for the vaccine distribution. I don't know how true it is or how widely held the view is, but I thought we'd at least open the door to discussing it at some point when we have, say, someone like Greg, who knows a little bit about what he's talking about, at least, as opposed to me just reading things on the internets and telling you, which after all is the heart of a podcast anyway, isn't it? But a little bit of pushback on the idea that major overhauls of the vaccine distribution plans are underway because the playbook, the cupboard was bare when it came to playbooks from the Trump administration. I just happened to see somebody, and man, maybe I can even call it up so we know a little bit more about what we're talking about. But the idea, sort of calling into question the idea that there were really major changes underway, that it was really more of a political play to blame the previous administration, and there's plenty that you could lay at their feet, for not distributing the vaccine efficiently, and they didn't. And I guess the hope is that the Biden administration will be able to do better, and by all accounts they really should be able to. But the idea here was that it was kind of a tricky thing, after all, vaccine distribution, and you might find on closer examination, really drilling down into what's actually happening, that there wasn't that much difference after all. Although the example that they picked out, at least immediately, pardon me, was that they were pointing out that the Biden administration was mobilizing the Pentagon to try to help, or leaning on the Pentagon to help mobilize the military for vaccine distribution, including administration of the vaccines, but that had in fact been proposed in the Trump administration already anyway. And of course, I think we all remember that was the case, but I'm not certain why this person decided that it was somehow less than valid to claim that the Biden administration was doing something particularly different. I'll have to check around and see if I can find where that may be. That I guess occurred far enough back in the timeline. And of course, I saw it early this morning and I didn't bother to put it away. Now, of course, I find myself preoccupied with it. But it may have been from, who knows, days or even weeks ago, I suppose, if it had been retweeted into my timeline as opposed to being an original part of the content. So, I don't know. I'll see if I can find it. But right now, it's not making itself immediately apparent. I thought that the key word there was that they may have used that the vaccine distribution game was actually quite tricky, but I guess tricky isn't turning it up. All right. Well, I probably should have left it for another day until I can find that tweet, but maybe it'll turn up. This is an interesting observation too. Ricky tells us that in Canada they do call it physical distancing. I guess we tried to adopt that as well, and it sounds like it would have been a good start. But I don't know. I think social distancing was brand new to us and novel, like the coronavirus, and we latched onto it, and that was it. We were never letting go of it. All right. Well, let's see. There are some things that I'm a little bit better versed in that I can talk about that I think are perhaps disappointing upon reexamination. I think I mentioned yesterday, and I certainly talked about it on Twitter in the morning yesterday and in the prior evening, during the prior evening, when I began to see Democratic members of Congress raising their voices on Twitter in opposition to placing Marjorie Taylor Greene, about whom there's even more revelations today, about placing Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Education Committee. And now they also put her on the Budget Committee, which is also pretty disturbing. And she's there in tandem with Lauren Boebert, which I think is probably a bad idea at every occasion. But lots of complaints about her being on the Education Committee and it being inappropriate given the, let's say, newly rediscovered videos of her harassing David Hogue and others of the Parkland High School, or the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School survivors of the shooting there, who had come to Washington, D.C. for a lobbying day looking for help with gun control legislation. And, I played you the tape of her harassing him, and it's quite unseemly and really disturbing. But I think they hit the nail on the head by saying, this is a person not only who doesn't belong in Congress, but who certainly doesn't belong on the Education Committee if her idea of dealing with the problem, the rash of school shootings that we've had, the epidemic, really, of school shootings that we've had, is, in the first instance, to harass the kids who come to Congress looking for help with this problem, is really not where she belongs. Now, she doesn't belong on any committees, and she ought to be facing the sort of severe backlash that Steve King faced and be stripped of all committee assignments. Except really, with Steve King, you had to strip him of all committee assignments. We knew he was a racist coming in, but I guess the case was that he looked like just a regular jackass Republican congressman, and they put him on a bunch of committees. And when they found out that he was as dedicated as he was to making racist comments, they decided, well, now we don't want him on these committees. He doesn't belong there. And as a punishment, as a sign to the world that the Republican Party does not tolerate this sort of behavior, we will punish him and strip him of his committee assignments. And that option is available to Republicans for Marjorie Taylor Greene, for Lauren Boebert, too. I suppose the argument is there that she's at that point, too. But Marjorie Taylor Greene, I think it's just been piling up. The evidence has just been piling up. And I guess it never will stop piling up because she was a prolific internet troll. Anyway, there are others that you could argue deserve the same treatment. But she's the one on which all the focus and attention has fallen at the moment. And so anyway, lots of calls from various Democratic members of Congress yesterday and the day before saying we need to stop her. She's been slated for the Education Committee and it's totally inappropriate. Agreed. But here's the thing. We've run into a little bit of a kabuki theater problem once again with the Democrats. For all the mewling, really, about how she didn't belong on the Education Committee. Nobody did anything to stop anyone from putting her on the Education Committee in the first place. And the opportunity was still there at the time the gnashing of teeth and rending of garments began. I guess I first noticed it, and I doubt very much that he was the first one out of the box with the complaint, but I first noticed it as Virginia Congressman Don Beyer, Northern Virginia Congressman, not mine, but from the neighboring district, spoke out about it. And I don't know whether he's on the Education Committee, and that maybe he was one of the first to speak up about it as a result. But he was very shortly followed by many others, and it clearly went out as a Democratic talking point by yesterday, Thursday morning. I saw, I don't know, let's say half a dozen or a dozen members of Congress making the same announcement, making the same pronouncement that it was inappropriate for her to be on the Education Committee. I think I saw, I can't remember who it was, so I don't want to call out the wrong name on this one, but someone was starting, a petition to strip her of her assignment to the Education Committee. They ought to be stripping her of the Budget Committee as well, but no one seemed to be that interested in that one. But as it turns out, no one was really interested in doing anything at all because, my suggestion to them when I first saw Don Beyer say that something ought to be done was, hey, I have looked and looked through Congress.gov, and there's no indication that any of the requisite organizing resolutions in the House has actually gone ahead and named her to these committees, which means that resolution is forthcoming, which means you ought to have an eye out for it. And ordinarily, these things are brought to the floor and considered very quickly, and in fact, usually adopted by unanimous consent. It's a bit of a log rolling exercise. Everyone recognizes that both Democrats and Republicans belong on committees in order to work things out. It's convention. Maybe they don't, but that's the convention. And so it's allowed. I mean, the House is a majoritarian body. They could, if they wanted to, if they thought this was a wise idea, they could block all members of the minority from serving on any committees. Most people would consider that unfair and a terribly partisan thing to do, and presumably for the news cycle or two following that action, there would be lots of complaints that you are far too partisan and you ought to be thrown out of office next election. And the next election is never more than 2 years away, and people, the other side salivates and says, aha, we'll definitely be able to win back majority control with this one. Who could possibly back this? And then 2 years later, everybody either forgets about it or they don't care about it, or other things intervene in the meantime, and people are more concerned about other stuff, or maybe they're just tribal and they pretend they don't care. And anyway, but so the idea here is the convention, the norm is that everybody is afraid to do something like interfere in the other party's right, as they see it, to nominate their own members for various seats on the committees. The understanding is that the majority will get X number of seats on the following committees, and the minority will get Y numbers of seats on the following committees, and you just hand it over to the other side and say, Republicans, have yourself a meeting, decide among yourselves how you're going to fill these allotted slots. We're not going to give you any more, but this is your number, and work it out among yourselves who gets what. And then hand it to us in a resolution, and then we'll pass one that assigns all the Democrats, and you'll pass one that assigns all the Republicans, and we won't get in each other's way, and we won't question anything. It's up to you. It's up to the parties, and we'll just adopt these two resolutions by unanimous consent. That's the usual practice. That's the norm. When things are normal, and you don't have people in one party or the other threatening to assassinate the rest of the members of Congress, or thinking that they're lizard people or pedophile vampires, or that, and you don't have people harassing teenagers and thinking that's a great way of doing ordinary business. You get the idea. Because Well, the norm is most apparent in its absence here when we have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene seeking to be nominated to the Education Committee. Anyway, the point is that these two resolutions, and sometimes it's more than two. That was part of my hesitation yesterday. But I'll explain that in a minute. But anyway, normally these things happen by unanimous consent, and they don't have to. They don't have to. You could absolutely object to passing these things by unanimous consent without even necessarily opposing the passage of the resolution itself. You could just say, well, I'm just opposed to it passing by unanimous consent. I don't think that's wise. Anyway, the point is that they brought this thing to the floor, and just like normal, as though nothing were happening, as though there weren't a dozen members of Congress calling for keeping Marjorie Taylor Greene off the Education Committee, nobody said a word. Liz Cheney brought the Republican resolution to the floor yesterday morning at 9 o'clock in pro forma session in the House of Representatives. In the space of about 3 minutes, all of the committee assignments were taken care of with the passage of House Resolution 62, naming all the Democrats, and House Resolution 63, bringing all the Republican nominations. The Democrats went first, and as expected, goes through without any problem. Unanimous consent requests very often, in this case, also includes dispensing with the reading of the resolution, because the people offering it all know what it says, obviously, and you do it in pro forma session, there's nobody there to hear it anyway, and nobody cares. Everyone knows what these two resolutions are. A quick glance will show you there's nothing weird or nefarious in any of them. Who cares who the parties put there? So, ordinarily, you bring up a resolution and the clerk will read it. You say, I ask unanimous consent the reading be dispensed with. There's no objection. So they just say the titles of the bill or the numbers of the bill, not really a bill, resolution HRes 62, HRes 63. And then you ask unanimous consent as the procedure begins to consider the bill as adopted. Or in yesterday's case, it was well known that was what they were going to do, and the person presiding over debate simply said, well, okay, well, you know what this is. Without objection, the resolution is considered adopted, and the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. That still exists, the motion to reconsider. So we should think about reconsidering that. But anyway, that was it. That's all it takes to adopt the two things, and all it would take to briefly stop it and to continue with the campaign that Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't belong on the Education Committee would be for one member, any member, Republican, Democrat, wouldn't matter, just to say, I object. Without objection, the bill, the resolution is considered as adopted. Well, I object. Okay, well, then the resolution isn't considered as adopted. That's interesting. What would happen then? You could ask for a roll call vote, and you might even lose. But you also might get all the Republicans on record as voting for the idea that Marjorie Taylor Greene did belong on the Education Committee, and that they wanted her to be on the Education Committee, and they thought it was appropriate for her to be on the Education Committee. And you would have, of course, the opportunity for every Democrat to say, no, I don't think it's appropriate. Now, if that happened, and every Democrat said, I don't think it's appropriate, and every Republican said, I think it is appropriate, the resolution would not pass, and there would be no Republicans on any committees, which you might think is a great thing. Or you might think, well, that will be viewed as overly partisan. And I think that the Democrats in the House probably said, yeah, I think that does look overly partisan. We can't block all Republicans from every committee. Now, of course, the opportunity was there for you to object to unanimous consent, or to, as they say, reserve the right to object. If you know what you're doing, you reserve the right to object, and you say, well, it's not that I object to any of these other Republicans being on committees. It's just this one, or at least on this committee. So if we could send this resolution back to the Republican conference, if they bring us back a resolution that says the exact same thing, except not Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Education Committee, I will accept this. I'll withdraw my objection. We can amend this on the floor right now, or we can come back here on Monday and have a floor vote and then decide what to do, or whatever. But I'm going to object to this being, Marjorie Taylor Greene's name being in this resolution anywhere. And that was an opportunity that was available to them. But they didn't do it. Now, yesterday morning, after the show, I began to see more complaints from more members of Congress saying pretty much the same thing. And I said, well, the resolution that put her on the committee might not have been adopted yet. I said might not have been because it's hard to tell. If you go to congress.gov and you call up yesterday, if you called up House Resolution 63, we may have actually covered this. I may have complained about this yesterday. But I'm very disturbed by this because now I know the answer. But I did see that there was a pro forma session yesterday and that these two resolutions were adopted. And I said, well, in all likelihood, these are the two party resolutions. Let me go and take a look. Because sometimes they'll take care of it piecemeal. It might be the top 5 committees or whatever. They handle every committee that they settled, but they were fighting over ways and means. And so they left that out of the resolution and they'll take care of that later. Sometimes they'll do that. And I figured maybe Marjorie Taylor Greene, controversial enough, maybe the Education Committee and Budget Committee aren't in this resolution. So I went to look it up, but because it was a brand new resolution, it wasn't in the system yet. Congress.gov didn't have the text, and they didn't read the bills on the floor. So the only people that knew what was in those damn things were the people offering the resolutions, and I guess the people who had worked on them the night before. Everybody had assumptions about what was in it, but nobody knew for sure. So it was hard to tell. And all I could say yesterday afternoon and right after the show was, well, if the resolution hasn't been offered yet, when I saw Congressman Bobby Scott, also from Virginia, and I think also maybe even chair of the committee by now, he's pretty high ranking, complaining about the same thing and that she ought not to be on that committee. And all I could say then was, well, if the resolution hasn't been offered, there's something you can do about this. Now, yesterday, at that point, it seems it already had been done, but the real intervention point was when I saw, for instance, Don Beyer saying the day before yesterday that she shouldn't be on the committee. Why not go down to the floor and object? Why not call the Speaker's office and say, it's my intention to object, so let's not handle those things in pro forma session. I'm going to call for a roll call vote. Now, the leadership may have contemplated this and may have pushed back. They may very well have said, well, what we really need to do is we need to continue with the norm. We don't want any more norm busting at this point. Let's leave it where it is. Let the Republicans make their appointments, and then we'll call them out for making those appointments, and we'll have this issue. And, it's going to take them a long time to overcome whatever inertia there's. Even if they're inclined to remove Marjorie Taylor Greene from her committee assignments, they'll want to do it and claim some credit for it if they decide to go ahead and do it. And they won't be interested in our pulling this power play on them and forcing them to make amendments to a resolution that we ordinarily would agree across the aisle. Each party agrees to adopt the other's resolution without any objection. Let's keep things as normal as possible. Let's continue to press for her removal, but let's not object to all of the committee assignments because they will say that they'll go to the press and say, Democrats are so partisan. They say this is about Marjorie Taylor Greene, but they're blocking all of us. Now, there are various remedies to that, by the way. If you couldn't get the Republicans to agree to amend the thing on the floor or agree to just voting on it on Monday, which would give them the weekend to rework the resolution and offer a substitute resolution. Instead, if they wouldn't do that, and you were worried about looking partisan, this isn't the perfect cure because, reporters don't always understand procedure, but why not at that point offer a resolution, have a Democratic sponsor, offer a resolution that is verbatim the same language as the Republican resolution minus Green, and then say, here it is, and we're voting for it. Every Democrat will be voting for this resolution, and it names Republicans and only Republicans to committees, but Republicans, for some reason, are opposed to this resolution. It's weird. They are voting against themselves and their own committee appointments for some reason. And that reason, in case you're having trouble understanding it, is protecting Marjorie Taylor Greene. That would be an even tighter vice to close them down and clamp down on them, I guess, and would make the point, that much sharper. But no, they didn't do it. So I'm a little disappointed in all of that. There's room for pushing back and saying this stuff is not done, and now we've preserved the issue, and we definitely plan to continue to press them, and this puts the onus on Republicans where it belongs. But the onus, I don't know. I guess the onus belongs on Republicans to recognize that she doesn't belong on committees. But I guess what's troubling me is, they understand that she's been speaking inappropriately. But I'm telling you, and have been telling you for quite a while, she's a security risk, and you need to address that. And to the extent that you're playing this game and saying, well, we ought to remove her, or it's all Republicans' fault, and it's on them to do something about it, I think that's a pretty clear indication that you are not taking the security issue seriously, and you're willing to say, I'll sit in the committee room with her all day long. I just think that her videos are inappropriate, which I think is kind of underplaying the situation. Anyway, that's got me steamed, even though there's going to be some pushback and say, oh, well, why don't you blame this on Republicans where the blame really belongs? True, I understand. It's all still on them. But to me, if you have the opportunity to do something, you do it. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netflix Radio. It's time, and I was just about to introduce this, but let's just answer the phone. For those of you who read the Morning Post, this is no mystery. For those of you just joining us now, time to introduce what's actually coming up next. Eli Zupnik is joining us, and he's here from the Fix Our Senate campaign. I did intro this on the Morning Post, but got carried away with some of the other procedure happening this morning, or happening yesterday, unfortunately, in the House. But Ellie is here to join us to discuss the long-running saga of fixing the Senate's filibuster rules. Always a hot topic on the show, always a hot topic at the beginning of any new Congress as well, and this one no different. Except for the fact, of course, that we have now replaced Donald Trump in the office of the presidency and installed Joe Biden. And to the extent that we hold out our hopes for an implementation of the Biden agenda in Congress, well, there's this small problem standing in the way. It's still there, the filibuster. And Ellie joins us to discuss, all right, what's up for the next round of the fight to rid ourselves of this scourge. Good morning, Ellie. How are you?
Good morning. Great to be on.
Okay. Well, you must be busy these days.
I am. I think that there's a whole lot of people who are busy these days.
True.
But that's good. It's a good problem to have.
Yes, that's true. We can. I'm happy to deal with that one. But I think the audience certainly knows the problem pretty well at this point. Pretty much anything you want to pass as part of a Biden agenda, because it's part of a Biden agenda, regardless of what it is, or even whether there's Republican agreement with some or all of the agenda items, they will likely stand in the way, even if not on policy grounds, just to make sure that there aren't any, or as few as possible in number, any Biden successes or anything that could be sold as a Biden success. It's that kind of obstructionism that we're up against. And I mean, everybody having seen it in the Obama administration and having heard Mitch McConnell declare quite openly that his whole goal was to make Obama a one-term president by defeating his agenda. It didn't work, but we all saw to what lengths they would go to obstruct his agenda, up to and including, of course, a year-long blockade on the nomination to the Supreme Court of Merrick Garland, who now returns in the Biden administration as designate for Attorney General. And so far, no progress on his nomination this time either. So it appears we still have a problem.
That's exactly right. I think what we learned from the Obama years, what Mitch McConnell, his great innovation was that he understood that if he can hold his caucus together and block anything and everything, the public wouldn't blame the minority of the Senate. They wouldn't blame Mitch McConnell's Senate minority Republicans. They would look at who's in control. They would look at who's in the White House, and they would point the finger squarely at President Obama and Democrats. He's bringing that innovation right back to the Biden administration and making it very clear, in fact, right from the start, right on the organizing resolution of the Senate, a resolution that typically is non-controversial, it's routine, it sails right through, simply affirming that the new ratios in the Senate, the new majority should have those ratios in committees and that the power should move from the old committee chair to the new committee chair. He threatened to filibuster even that. So I think he sent a strong signal right from the start that he's back to the same old political games he played in 2009. He has no intention of actually working with Democrats to get anything done. And anything that we hear right now, all the complaints that they're making about Democrats not being willing to work with them and trying to jam through a reconciliation bill or move a partisan COVID relief package, you know, I don't have much sympathy for these kind of crocodile tears. I think we all should know the game that they're playing by now. And what makes me hopeful right now is that more and more Senate Democrats actually do. They see right through these games. They're transparent. They're not buying what Senator McConnell and even Senator Collins are selling right now. And I'm feeling hopeful and confident that this time we can really get some things done.
It would be nice, and definitely some progress made with Democrats. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that the caucus of Democrats, the informal caucus of Democrats opposed to any filibuster changes was larger and included some people who are now pretty much sold on the prospect. As you were saying, the organizing resolution very typically non-controversial and passed very easily. First segment of the show was about the House adopting its own organizing resolutions for committee assignments as well, and that's I guess that's kind of a good illustration. It's so non-controversial usually, which is what makes it such a extraordinary thing to see it filibustered in the Senate. No filibuster available in the House, but it's so routine that even in the middle of all the complaints about Marjorie Taylor Greene and how she ought not to be assigned to the Education Committee, Democrats went ahead and stood aside as Republicans nominated her to the Education Committee and put her there and made no objection to it whatsoever. And so a little bit, some gamesmanship going on over there. But
That's right.
It speaks
That's
to
right.
the...
And I can't, I can't speak to the House. I've been
you won't have to
more
answer
focused
for
on
them.
the Senate. but I will tell you on the Senate side, I think this really backfired on Senator McConnell. I think what he tried to do was, and you I know you've been talking about this for the whole week, but it's worth pulling it all together now, because what he tried to do was he thought that if he filibustered a process issue, a procedural issue, one that people across the country aren't and shouldn't be paying attention to, he would have an advantage rather than wait and have the fight come over COVID relief or raising the minimum wage or Voting Rights Act or expanding health care or any of the issues that the vast majority of the American people are behind Democrats on, and that Republicans would have a harder time filibustering and obstructing. They will do those things. But McConnell thought he was being shrewd by picking the fight early, picking the fight on a process issue, but he overreached and he didn't read the members and he didn't understand the anger on the Democratic side. And you saw right away people from Bernie Sanders all the way to Joe Manchin and everyone in between stood with Senator Schumer, stood with Leader Schumer, and said, no, you lost. You are now in the minority, and you didn't give us anything when you were in the majority. We had no ability to influence the rules, so there's no way you're going to start telling us what to do now that you're in the minority. So what he did was he unified the Democrats. He made them angrier, and we still have a long way to go, but I think that the filibuster is more likely to be eliminated now than it was a week ago.
Well, I certainly hope so. Again, the progress that's been made has been tremendous. I think, well, maybe you'll tell us if we're estimating this correctly, that the current roadblock to reform is widely reported to be down to to two Democratic senators. You mentioned Joe Manchin and Senator Sinema also now, I guess, at least making noises about being resistant to changing anything about the filibusters. But and though her name is kind of new to the anti-reform caucus, like I said, a couple of years ago, there were a good half dozen, and they included names who are still there. Dianne Feinstein was always resistant to it. Pat Leahy was resistant to it for a very long time. And in the last couple of years, I guess since 2013, when Harry Reid first reformed the filibuster such that executive nominations were no longer subject to a 60-vote threshold, they all did. Enough of them went along. There were enough to put together a majority. Not everyone went along, but at least we're down to two now. But any indication, how do we read the tea leaves on Sinema and Manchin now? Because they're still not committing 100% clearly one way or the other without also offering hope to the other side every time they open their mouths.
That's right. I mean, I take them at their word. I think they both of them and a number of other members support the filibuster. They think that it is a tool that has promoted bipartisanship and forced compromise, and to give them a little bit of their argument, maybe in the past at times that was the case. Of course, I don't agree generally, and of course I would quibble with their argument, but to grant them that point, maybe at times in the past there was the filibuster did force Democrats or the majority party to look to the minority to get the rest of the way over to 60 votes, perhaps. But the reality is times have changed, and Mitch McConnell has turned the filibuster into a weapon of pure partisan obstruction. It is now, as you and your listeners know very well, a de facto 60-vote requirement in the Senate, which was never the case, not something that was intended to be in any way. So the reason I'm hopeful and the reason that I feel good about where we are is that senators like Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, they are moderates, they are pragmatic, they want to get things done. They talk about getting things done. They have things that they want to deliver for Arizona and for West Virginia, and they don't want to spend 2 years in the majority when they know that they have no excuses. They're going to be blamed, and also they want to get things done. They can't spend 2 years pointing fingers and complaining and saying, I wish I can get things done, but I just can't. So this really comes down to the choice that they and every other Democrat is going to face. And that is, do they want to deliver results and deliver on the promises they made? Or do they want to prioritize a Senate rule that's been abused, that's been changed many times over the years, that's not written into the Constitution? And I'm hoping it's the former. And I'm pretty confident that just like we saw in 2013 when Democrats across the board at the beginning of the year were very committed to keeping the filibuster on nominees, the longer they saw Republican obstruction, the angrier they got and the more committed they got to reform. And by November of 2013, they had every single Democrat, or at least enough Democrats, they had 51 Democrats on board with reform. And I'm hoping it doesn't take 11 months this year. I think there's a whole lot that needs to get done and a whole lot that needs to get done quickly. But I feel confident that every moment that passes, Democrats are going to get angrier and angrier. And more importantly, people across the country, their constituents are going to get angrier and angrier because they're expecting results. They were promised things in the election season. They delivered full control of government to Democrats, and they're not going to accept excuses if things don't get done.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough spot for them. And I guess at the end, that's the real pressure point with it. It's hard to imagine how you move people like Sinema and Manchin when they say, look, I'm just flat opposed to this. But I just don't see any other alternative for them. And I guess it's just a matter of time, or on which issue will they become frustrated enough to say, okay, I'm just going to be in huge trouble at home. It's no longer makes any sense to say, well, Republicans are doing it. If everybody can read in the newspaper every day that Democrats hold the White House, the Senate, and the House, that's all you really need. That most people really recognize that as those are the people that I need to blame if something goes wrong or doesn't happen.
That's right. And we're at a point now, there's so many things that are going on, from the COVID crisis, the economic crisis, racial justice issues that have come up over the past year, and all the issues that have just sat dormant, comprehensive immigration reform, or worse, dormant, worse, that need to be addressed right now. And this is not a moment when people are going to accept inaction. This is not a moment when people are going to accept excuses. So again, this is what makes me feel hopeful, is that we're going to face that choice fairly quickly. I have confidence in Senator McConnell that he's going to force that choice. And I also feel that Democrats are at a point now when they're not going to be fooled the way they were in 2009. President Obama has spoken about that recently, that yes, he truly hoped that that Republicans would work with him. He hoped after 2012 that the fever would break. He said that famously. Now in his book, he is expressing some regrets over giving them that benefit of the doubt. And of course, he recently called for an end to the Jim Crow relic that is the filibuster if Republicans use it to obstruct progress on the Voting Rights Act and other critical democracy reforms that our country needs.
Yes, that was that's another big name in the win column. Not a senator, but it took a tremendous amount of work to get Barack Obama around to this idea, and of course it also took him completing 2 terms and realizing exactly what he was up against, and then giving it some thought and coming around on this. But originally, he took a very hands-off approach on this. So it's good to have him on the right side of things. He's still quite influential among his former colleagues and among Democrats generally, obviously. So what our Fix Our Senate campaign? What's the mechanics of how you're proceeding now? What are you doing? What's your campaign working on in order to move things or shore up general support? What phase are you in here?
Sure. Well, first of all, everyone should go to fixoursenate.org or follow us on Twitter at FixOurSenate. We rolled out a big ad campaign across the country, in D.C. and states across the country. Our ad features President Obama making his Jim Crow relic comment and highlighting the need for reform of the filibuster. We recently, just last weekend, had a full-page ad in the New York Times. Other groups across the country have been doing similar kind of work, putting the pressure on, making sure that Senator Schumer, President Biden, other members of leadership understand how important this is, how high this is on the minds of activists, advocates, and ordinary citizens who just want to get things done. We're working very closely with groups in D.C. And at the local state level to help them connect the dots between the issues they care about, whether it's immigration reform, gun safety, climate change, and the filibuster, which is the brick wall that stops progress on any and all of it. Groups like Sunrise, they're a member of our coalition, Indivisible, Our Revolution, really trying to make that connection very clear to people who are very in the know advocates who may come to DC and talk to their senators, and ordinary citizens who may not engage much in politics but got engaged recently, maybe because of climate change, the climate crisis, maybe because of immigration reform and what Trump has been doing at the border, and thought that the election was the win, but it's not enough to win the election. You actually have to get the results, and we're trying to make sure people understand what is stopping those results from happening, and what they can do about it to let their senator know that it's not going to be an excuse, that they're not going to accept senators throwing up their hands and saying, we would have loved to do all those things we promised, but there's that dang pesky filibuster stopping everything. That's just not good enough this time.
Yeah. Well, okay. Plenty of progress has been made on this. Here I see some news you can you can add to your collection here. I don't know. This is a backhanded gift to your coalition. Joe Lieberman says he wants the filibuster to be preserved. So I guess that will help.
I think I feel pretty good about that. I think it's a general rule of life that if Senator Lieberman thinks you're wrong, you're probably in a good place.
Yeah. So, okay. That's a nice new feature for the website. And interesting to hear you recite the coalition members, because the coalition a similar coalition came together to help promote the necessity, the awareness of the need for filibuster reform prior to 2013 changes that represented, largely the same coalition in terms of where we were politically. Times have changed, and political power and influence has coalesced around different centers of leadership. So it was very interesting to hear that now the coalition now includes, of course, all of these groups that just didn't exist for the campaign leading up to, in the beginning in 2009 and 10 and leading up to 2013, those groups didn't exist. Sunrise, or at least not in its current form. Indivisible, of course, arising after Trump's election. So places and organizations that have brought either new approaches or, more importantly, new people into the political arena who may have missed or sat out from the first round of filibuster reform push, now very much engaged. And I guess it's a process you have to repeat every so often to remind people whatever issue it is that's brought you into the political arena, none of it happens unless this happens first. And that was kind of the key realization the first go round. And there are new folks who weren't politically active, might not even have been old enough to vote the first time around, who now are very much engaged. And
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I'll also note that we also in our coalition are some of those groups that were key in the 2013 reforms. The Communication Workers of America, Democracy Initiative, Common Cause. These are groups that have been fighting this fight for years and have made people aware, got some big victories in 2013, and now we're working really hard to finish the job. We also have groups like Brady, of course, the gun violence campaign, that are issue groups that understand that an issue like gun safety is a perfect example of an issue that, when it comes to something like background checks, over 90% of the country supports common sense background checks legislation, and a fairly common sense middle of the road bill, the Manchin-Toomey bill, was filibustered, even though it had the support of over 90% of the American people. There is no chance that we get strong common sense gun safety legislation if the filibuster exists. Brady is a great example of a group that understands this and has the filibuster on the agenda, is educating their membership and talking to elected officials about this. And we're hoping that more and more groups and people, activists, advocates, ordinary citizens connect those dots and put the pressure on, because that's the way that we're going to get this done.
Yeah, I'm looking at the logos down at the bottom of the landing page here, and that just sort of document that progress through the years. Up at the top, some of the names, I guess, retained from the what we'll call the old partnership, even though it's not that old, but established groups, surely, and I guess, no point in hiding it, moneyed groups, really, who can also help put a coalition like this together and bring in issue groups that have a vested interest in seeing the filibuster reformed, but may not have at this point necessarily the resources to divert to what I guess is ordinarily would be considered a side or at least accompanying issue, if not their core issue. But down at the bottom, where the newer members of the coalition appear to have been added here, as you mentioned, Sunrise, I see, was Working Families Party. Is that's
right?
Right there as well. Progressive Change Campaign Committee. They've been around, but I don't think they were able to participate in the first go round of our revolution here as well, from out of the Bernie Sanders campaign. So really fantastic job for you in integrating the newer movements into this one. The concept is the same. It hasn't changed. As long as the legislative filibuster is there, it really doesn't matter what your particular issue is. You'll have a vested interest in throwing your lot together with everybody else here and making sure change happens. So,
well,
really
I appreciate
great.
that, and I give a lot of credit to the leadership of these groups. They understand that those dots need to be connected and that nothing they care about will happen without getting rid of the filibuster.
Right.
And I think this coalition is going to expand in the coming weeks and months as more and more people make that connection, and as we see Senator McConnell his obstruction in action on the issues that people care about. We're already seeing that. We saw that on that routine organizing resolution that people shouldn't have paid attention to, but we're going to see that on things that people are going to start paying attention to, from COVID relief to minimum wage, democracy reforms, HR 1 for the People Act. Those are the things that people are really going to engage on, and the obstruction is going to be clear, and we want to make sure that the solution is crystal clear too. Get rid of the filibuster, deliver results, deliver on your promises, and that's the right way to go.
Yeah, I'm impressed with it, and I think it means a great deal just to see them there as included as partners. As you say, they recognize this. Sometimes the early knock on some of these organizations from people who have been around in the political organizing or lobbying or just political observing game for a long time was, well, I understand their issues and I'm with them on it, but they just don't know how things work. And this is pretty clear evidence that yes, they do, and they're doing the things that need to be done in order to get to success on their issues. It's just not the case that they don't cooperate with others or don't understand where they sit on the spectrum of issues. This is the clearest evidence that they get it quite clearly, and that you've put together a coalition that includes them says the same about you and everybody else working at Fix Our Senate. So well done there. I don't know if you were waiting for that endorsement, but
we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and lots of work is going into this in our coalition and outside of our coalition.
Yeah. Well, all right. Let's see. What else can we? Are there any other angles on this that we haven't covered that you'd like to bring to the fore here? Coming up on a break shortly, which you're welcome to stay through if you have a broader point to make. But if not, we can certainly wrap things up. But any twists to the situation that we haven't talked about that people familiar with the subject might be interested in?
I don't think so. I think we covered the main points. I think you and your audience have been tracking this for many years. So I think we covered it. But let's we'll keep talking about this in the weeks ahead.
Yeah, let's do that, and let's plan to check in and retake the temperature of the Senate Democratic Caucus every once in a while, and see if we can't predict either what issues will really move some of the last holdouts, or find ways ahead of time, even better, to make sure that the temperature does rise appropriately, and that the people who need to feel the pressure are feeling it and shouldn't be approaching them. I guess strategically, we don't want to be approaching them as enemies in this fight here, or they're potential allies. But I guess that's something to talk about too, how we walk the tightrope of raising the temperature under Democratic holdouts by raising the temperature under, I suppose, the issues underlying upcoming votes. But if we can identify them, and you can help us and the audience here identify those issues before they hit the floor, give us some lead time that we can help you raise public pressure about it, we'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to come on, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much again for coming by. Ellie Zupnik, fixoursenate.org is where you'll find the website. You can follow him on Twitter. Is the Twitter name again same, Fix Our Senate?
That's right.
Okay,
Yep.
Easy enough. No spelling issues there. Okay, appreciate it. Thanks again, and let us know when something's happening, and we'll make room in the agenda on pretty much any day you need. If especially if there's on an emergency basis some necessary information you want to get the word out about, time to start calling senators about this particular bill coming up or another, whether it's coming to the floor or going into markup or what have you. We appreciate it if you help us keep our eye on that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Take care, Ellie. Thanks very much for coming by. And anytime, please just raise a flag and we'll add you to the agenda.
Thank
Okay.
you. Great
Take
to be on.
care.
Bye.
All right. Talk to you again soon, I hope. All right. Let's see. We've got our first or second break coming up in just a second. I guess we could have stretched things out till the music started or something like that, but easier to just say, I think we've covered it here. It's a tough audience to talk to, not in the sense that they're not receptive to the message, but I don't know what else is there for us to tell you about the filibuster, the need to reform it, the pressure points that would be most effective in reforming it, who's standing in the way, and I guess all we really need to discuss at this point going forward, once it becomes a little clearer, just strategically, how do we approach Senators Manchin, Sinema, and some of the others who are still reluctant, and I guess the special case of Dianne Feinstein, should she prove to be a problem on this as well. What strategic approach ought we to be taking here? It can't work, I assume, that the strategy be hundreds of thousands of angry emails to Senators Manchin and Sinema, or any combination of Democratic senators, demanding change, but not laying out the case for why it is to your and your state's great advantage to do this. We'll have to hammer that out, and Ellie will help us do it. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back now. Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still casting about to see if I couldn't find those series of tweets about how tricky the vaccine distribution issues were, but too bad I didn't grab it when I first saw it. But I kind of feel like I ought to continue hunting. Perhaps after the show today I'll be able to narrow it down. But of course, today's Friday, so I guess the chances that I will find it and then remember to bring it back up again on Monday are pretty slim. Although, if I find them and the point holds, then it'll be something to discuss with Greg. And then, of course, there's always the possibility of finding it after the show is over, but before the weekend fully kicks in. And if that happens, then I can send that over to Scott, and we can include it in the daily roundup. And then you'll be able to at least evaluate the thing for yourself. But, I don't think it's terribly controversial to suggest that maybe, just maybe, there were some elements of what could have given, competence and some time, coalesced into a real plan under the Trump administration that could be salvaged by a Biden administration and implemented, subsequent to the transfer of power, and still leave room for saying, well, maybe the Trump administration was eventually going to get around to this. The problem, of course, among others, one, they just weren't competent to implement any plan, and then two, speaking of the cupboards being bare, the vaccine that was supposed to be there for distribution, still not clear on just what the hell happened to several million doses of these vaccines. And I guess probably deserves some investigation inside the House, and I guess even in an evenly divided Senate, given the fact that the Senate Intelligence Committee was able to conduct a relatively, I guess for the Senate, a relatively decent investigation into Trump and his connections to Russia and Russians and the Russian government and the shadow government that exists over there as well. Given the fact that they were able to do that, not only despite the fact that the committee was Republican controlled, but that it included some real backhanded or underhanded and sometimes out in the open Republican obstructionists, they did some really remarkable work. I don't know why they let some of the things escape their figurative lips that they did. But I don't know. Sometimes there's no explaining those people over in the Senate. They're just a bunch of weirdos. All right. Let's see. So many directions we could go in the second hour here that we will go part of a bunch of them, let's say, and ruin them all as thorough deep dives, but give you things to think about over the weekend. One, we'll head back to the stupid problem of Marjorie Taylor Greene, just at least briefly, to note that the headlines this morning are, I guess, exhibit some signs that the campaign against her from the Democratic side is meeting with some success. This despite the fact that, pragmatic success, like keeping her out of the education committee room, was available, and Democrats, I guess, opted to let that opportunity slip through their fingers in exchange for the longer-term strategic ability to keep hammering Republicans generally. And I understand. I mean, I get the point. I just wish they'd been clearer about it, but sometimes they think hiding the ball is a better idea, whatever. How people don't like to see sausage made. But honestly, I guess hammering on Marjorie Taylor Greene only gets you so far. If you can turn the issue into one in which you can either hammer every Republican so that every Democratic member of the House can go back and fight against Republicans, and every challenger to Republicans still remaining in the House can use this in the campaign. You can run against an incumbent Republican by saying that person thought it was okay to put Marjorie Taylor Greene on the committee. If they're smart and savvy, they can also say, so did every Democrat in the House. But I don't know. Sometimes at some level, the procedural abstraction escapes most voters, and that level is usually right away. So we'll see. They still are smart people and kind of usually know what they're doing. It just frustrates me when you could have done something. I mean, this would have made a real splash to block her from initial assignment to the committee, and it would have made the weekend news cycle about that, and it could have made the weekend news cycle about putting Republicans on record as defending her. Right now, they just sort of say, well, I didn't know what the F was going on. I didn't show up for a pro forma session, and I wasn't watching. And you know what? Neither were Democrats. I don't know how well that, does as an issue over the weekend. But I can tell you that if on Monday they all had to come back and vote up or down on the record on her, that would have been a pretty splashy issue. Anyway, I said it was meeting with some success, and this is what I mean. Headline in the Hill. It's limited success, a headline in the Hill. But because I'm me, I see these things on Twitter all the time, and now we'll make a bigger splash for them. The Hill should be paying me. Unbelievable. I should be charging them rent here. GOP has growing Marjorie Taylor Greene problem. A good headline. Definitely want to have it there. Although I will also note for the record that it was correctly noted by, what's his name? I only remember his Twitter handle. By Julian Sanchez, who tweets as normative. Julian Sanchez making the correct observation here in a very popular tweet about this article where they say GOP has a growing Marjorie Taylor Greene problem. He says, no, it has a Marjorie Taylor Greene symptom. Get it? Right. She's not the problem. She's a symptom of the problem that they have. And really, if you manage to purge Marjorie Taylor Greene, not only is Lauren Boebert right behind her to pick up where she left off, but so in reality are like dozens of Republicans who are just, for some reason, shyer about being this stupid. Marjorie Taylor Greene just really has no problem about being this dumb up front and in your face, which we discussed yesterday. So what is this one about? Scott Wong, he's not wrong. Oh my God. In writing this piece for The Hill here. First term Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is a Republican and is from Georgia, correctly noted, is increasingly becoming a liability for her GOP colleagues because of a string of controversies that have thrown the conference off message, sort of, and led to repudiations by Republican leaders, but not any action. Right? Greene, a Trump loyalist and a believer in the QAnon conspiracy theory, she continues to deny it, filed impeachment articles against President Biden. Remember, we mentioned that on his first full day in office, and that's kind of a revealing read. I mentioned it yesterday. If I had a 15-hour show, I'd read them to you. You should read them. Bottom line, in case you just don't want to give it that kind of time, what has Biden done as president that warrants his impeachment? Nothing, of course, and certainly not by the time that she filed those articles of impeachment. He hadn't been president for long enough to do anything. The complaints, interestingly enough, all stem from, her QAnon-colored belief that as vice president, Biden did all sorts of things which, anger her and make her believe that he's worthy of impeachment, and it's the usual fare, some of which I think you've heard before, and some of which I guess probably has deeper meaning to QAnon believers that the rest of us just think is nonsense and doesn't make any sense and we gloss over. But generally speaking, as vice president, he sold out American interests in Ukraine, and he, demanded the dismissal of the prosecutor there, which of course everybody was demanding, but somehow that was terribly corrupt. The old defense that Donald Trump offered in his first impeachment that was largely discredited is repeated here. Then, of course, the Burisma story, and he allowed Hunter Biden to do this and that, and his laptop and China, all of that stuff. What's, I guess, of some interest in all of this is that, and she'll never admit that this is the case, but logically speaking, Marjorie Taylor Greene and all similarly situated Republicans who objected to impeaching Donald Trump after he was out of office, or when they knew he would, by the time the trial came around, be out of office, suddenly tacitly endorsing impeaching people who have left the office, at least where they supposedly perpetrated the acts, for which you're impeaching them. So that's kind of interesting. All of this stuff they claim was done, even though actually much of it was not done, or certainly not done in the fashion she claims, was done while he was vice president. In point of fact, they ought to be impeaching him for his performance, if this is what they believe, as vice president. And then, of course, seeking to bar him from federal office in the future, which would have the same effect, I guess, removing him from office as president of the United States. But I guess, I don't know. One, she's not that smart, can't really understand that level of abstraction. And two, just politically, they're not going to admit that that's something you can do when that would give Democrats political leverage in the trial of Donald Trump. Although they probably really, if they thought about it, if they were capable of thinking about it, would see, we can totally get away with this because the senators aren't going to change their minds based on logic. They're going to vote no on the question of jurisdiction. They'll lose, but they're going to go vote no on the question of jurisdiction. And I guess to the extent that they hope to convert a Democrat on the subject, a story like this, that we are filing impeachment articles and backing impeachment articles against Biden on the same basis, would only undermine the story and convince Democrats not to go there. So anyway, don't look out for that logic to reconcile itself anytime soon. Not the least reason being because, again, we are talking about a QAnon lunatic. They're not going to respond to this. So anyway, the rest of the story in the Hill, Greene has supported Facebook posts that called for executing Speaker Pelosi and FBI agents, and in a video that resurfaced this week is seen taunting gun control activist David Hogue a year after he survived the 2018 mass school shooting at his high school in Parkland, Florida. I've noticed, by the way, a trend in the news coverage away from naming the school itself Marjory Stoneman Douglas, even though that was the convention early on, to just a reference to the location, Parkland, Florida. I wonder if that's conscious choice and reflective of anything in particular, and should I be following the same convention? Anyway, Democrats are seizing on the controversies. Here's the real key issue. Not doing anything about the controversies. They're seizing on them, though, hoping to make Green the new face of House Republicans. Congresswoman Green's misconduct has helped radicalize domestic terrorists and endangered the lives of her colleagues and fellow members of Congress. Representative Jimmy Gomez of California wrote in a letter asking colleagues to support a resolution to remove Green from Congress. She has broken her oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, and as such is unworthy of the high position of honor and trust reposed in the office, he wrote. The controversies are turning up the heat on a GOP already divided over former President Trump's role in the violent mob attack on the Capitol earlier this month. A spokesman for House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has had no comment for this story, but pointed to earlier remarks where the GOP leader said he would speak to Green about her support of posts advocating violence against Pelosi and others. These comments are deeply disturbing, and Leader McCarthy plans to have a conversation, remember this one, with the Congresswoman about them, the spokesman said. But by the way, did anybody happen to notice? I don't think we took note on the show, but you probably noticed via Twitter or some other of your news inputs. Where was Kevin McCarthy instead of having this conversation with Marjorie Taylor Greene? He was at Pervalago hanging out with Trump, for having been summoned there by a guy who has not only no formal political power, but really was never understood to have any political acumen even while president, but can still snap his fingers, I guess, and make Kevin McCarthy jump, which was the subject of a lot of speculation. Honestly, people really wondered, why would you subject yourself to this? You are senior to him now. But whatever, okay, that's just ingrained in Kevin McCarthy, I guess. Let's see. What else did they have to say here? McCarthy said he called Green last week and told her he disagreed with her decision to file articles of impeachment against Biden on the first day of his presidency, saying it undermined the party's argument that Democrats' second impeachment of Trump was purely partisan. Interesting. I don't think he got into the logic of it, but there you go. The number 2 GOP leader, Minority Whip Steve Scalise, who was also, by the way, as you know, nearly killed by a gunman in 2017, has said he consistently condemned violent rhetoric in politics. This is no exception. There is no place for comments like that in our political discourse. House Republican Conference Chair Liz Cheney, who has come under criticism from conservatives in her party for her vote to impeach Trump, called the social media post liked by Green repugnant and has previously called the QAnon movement dangerous lunacy. Keep that in mind, that Liz Cheney has said that, and for reasons we discussed earlier on the show. For effect, I would probably at this point, if there's comments in here, do they include the comments of the speaker? Yeah, it's in here. Well, maybe I'll get back to it at the end of the article. Maybe I'll actually go ahead and do it too. What I am planning for this. A 2/3 vote would, of course, be needed to oust Green, a high hurdle given that Democrats control a slim majority in the lower chamber, and most Republicans are likely to stand by the Trump ally given his continued hold on the party. Yet that also means Green can be used as a weapon by Democrats against Republicans who do not want to be put in a position of having to defend their colleague. Representative Jahana Hayes. Yes, this is another of the half dozen or so that I saw. I was going to say working on, but I really think addressing is probably the strongest I can put to it. Addressing this issue yesterday. Jahana Hayes, a former National Teacher of the Year, is circulating a letter among colleagues calling on McCarthy to boot Green off the Education and Labor Committee after revelations that she liked disturbing Facebook posts falsely claiming that the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting was a hoax, and others calling for a bullet to the head of Pelosi and for former President Obama, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and FBI agents in the, quote, deep state to be hanged. Hayes represents, of course, Sandy Hook and Newtown, Connecticut. Pelosi herself on Thursday pummeled GOP leaders for handing Greene a seat on the education panel. Yes, she had a press conference in the, late morning, early afternoon following the pro forma session in the House. And you know which one I'm talking about. Absolutely, laying into the Republicans and how dare they and how inappropriate. And you'll have to ask them why they think it's appropriate. And that's the best framing she can give it. Some mention of her comments here. What I'm concerned about, she says, is the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives, who was assigning her to the Education Committee when she has mocked the killing of little children at Sandy Hook Elementary School, when she has mocked the killing of teenagers at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, Pelosi told reporters in the Capitol. What could they be thinking? Or is thinking too generous a word for what they might be doing? It's absolutely appalling, she said. For now, there is no indication McCarthy plans to strip Greene of her committee assignment, which is what the leader did to former Representative Steve King 2 years ago after he defended white supremacy. But it appears that internet sleuths are just getting started in digging into the digital trail of Greene, who owns a construction company with her husband and has never held public office before. I thought that she was the owner of a CrossFit gym, and she may actually be the owner as well of a CrossFit gym, but I guess that wasn't her primary primary source of income. But I did learn a little bit about the construction company. It's nothing nefarious or weird or anything. Yes, she's the owner of a construction company with her husband. It was her father's construction company, and I guess when he retired, he sold the business to his daughter and her husband, and now they own it. I mean, normal transfer of the business, but I guess, I'm sure somewhere along the line she portrayed herself as having built this thing from the ground up or whatever, and she's such a savvy businesswoman, and she knows all about the economy as a result, but whatever. Well, anyway, let's see. On Thursday, the liberal group Media Matters revealed that Greene penned a 2018 Facebook post espousing a wild and false conspiracy theory. I wanted to get to this one just to let you know what was the latest craziness. And this takes all the fun out of it to hear the Hill reporting on a Media Matters version of it. Media Matters tends to drain all the fun out of things anyway, but they are right, and they find good stuff, but if you really want to roast somebody over things like this, look elsewhere. But now we'll really see the blood drained out of this thing. But okay, on Thursday, Media Matters reported that Greene penned a 2018 Facebook post espousing a wild and false conspiracy theory that California's deadliest wildfires at the time, I think the Camp Fire, they called it. They name fires based on where they started, and I don't know where the hell this one started, but I guess Camp was part of the name, and it makes it sound like campfire. Like, that's not a serious thing. That's a fun thing. We roast marshmallows and make s'mores. It was a huge, deadly wildfire. Better that we not name it, but just in case you wanted to know which one it was. California's deadliest wildfires at the time, the theory was that they had been caused by lasers from space. I wish I had like a, echo. Lasers from space. But more than that, like I said, it drains all the color out of it. It was a Rothschild family Jewish conspiracy-controlled space laser that started the fire, just to add that element to it. She's also anti-Semitic. I bet you had already guessed that, but just so that you don't miss that element. A day earlier, Fred Gutenberg, whose daughter was shot and killed in the Parkland shooting, released a video of Greene confronting and following David Hogue outside the Capitol. She later tells Gutenberg she is usually armed and calls the teenager a coward. We definitely noted that element of it, walking behind him and then saying, I have a gun, basically. By the way, there was also a release of a video yesterday, or unearthing, I suppose, of a video yesterday of her harassing Hogue inside the Capitol complex buildings. I don't know where it looks like he's in one of the House or Senate office buildings. And this may have been where she first encountered him and then followed him actually outside as he walked toward the Capitol. I don't know the order of the videos, but she was harassing him both indoors and outdoors. And in both videos, by the way, she goes almost immediately to the question of asking him, why do you support the red flag laws? Which, in case everybody I think is familiar, but those are the laws in certain states where if there are red flags, if there are indications out there that a person in question poses a serious threat, a serious danger to themselves or others, that the state authorities can have the state authorities have clearance to judicially order that their firearms be confiscated, at least temporarily, so that they don't act on the impulses that might pose a danger to themselves or others. In other words, identifying people beforehand who have the potential to commit a mass shooting and taking their guns away. So she's constantly asking him, both indoors and outdoors, why do you support red flag laws? And now we understand fully what it was. I mean, we probably understood at the time why she was opposed to them, but now we have more reason to understand why she's opposed to them. She would be subject to those red flag laws. She's the primary example, the crystalline example of the kind of person whose guns you might want to think about taking away in a situation like this, because not so much that she's opposed to David Hogue's support for gun safety laws, but that she is, in her daily discourse, liking and posting on Facebook about committing what is now would be considered a workplace shooting. Ordinarily, if you have somebody out there saying, I'm going to go and kill all my colleagues at work, and I ought to do that, that's something that would be smart and wise to do, that would be a pretty big red flag. You'd want to think about, do we have the authority to do something about this ahead of time with this person? But on a technicality, she didn't write them. She merely liked them. Although, again, remember, she's blaming this on staff and interns. What staff and interns at a construction company are handling your Facebook posts for you in 2018? That doesn't work. That's not real. That's a lie. But in addition, in 2018, she wasn't a member of Congress. She might not even have entertained ideas of being in Congress at any point. So liking someone else's post about putting a bullet in Nancy Pelosi's head isn't technically, at that point, I'm going to commit a workplace shooting. But it's pretty damn close. And, of course she would be. Now we understand why she's so freaked out about red flag laws as opposed to just simply, concentrating on don't touch my guns. The tangential issue really intrigued her for some reason. All right, well, let's see. David Hogue, on Thursday called on McCarthy to punish Green. He calls on her my message to Kevin McCarthy is this: take her committee assignments away, he said on CNN. Also, along with that, don't support her when she runs for re-election again and try to get her primaried. And I guess instead of supporting her, okay, it's a good message. McCarthy didn't heed some of the same warnings last year when Green was running in the GOP primary to replace retiring Representative Tom Graves, a respected conservative appropriator who was close to leadership and represented the northwest corner of Georgia. Scalise backed Green's Republican primary opponent, neurosurgeon John Cowan, Cowan, after Politico reported she had made racist, Islamophobic, and anti-Semitic comments in hours of Facebook videos. But McCarthy chose not to intervene in the race, even as Georgia Republicans pleaded with him to do so. She defeated Cowan 40% to 21% and cruised to victory in November in the deep red district. In a statement to The Hill on Thursday, Green made clear she would not back down or apologize for her past words and actions, no matter how much pressure is applied by Democrats or the press. That's maybe why Republicans need to apply the pressure, but she might not listen regardless. Normal blah, blah, blah. Democrats, fake news. They're coming after me because I'm a threat to their goal of socialism. They're coming after me because they know I represent the people, not politicians. They're coming after me because I like President Trump. I will always defend conservative ideas. The normal stuff. Democrats, of course, aren't the only ones calling for Green to face punishment. Representative Adam Kinzinger, a Republican from Illinois and an Iraq War veteran, a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. And as a matter of fact, the Air Force, that's a new emphasis for me, also needs to see her gone and agrees with the idea, saying Green is unmoored from truth, and that he also wants to see her kicked off the Education Committee. She's, quote, not a Republican. Kinzinger said Thursday on CNN she may be like this new definition of Republican, but that's kind of a rhino thing, he says, a Republican in name only. Well, it's a good try, but not really necessarily an accurate description of where the bulk of your party is at. But keep in mind all the attacks against her and Pelosi's after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. It makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I wanted you to keep in mind, I know this segment is going on far too long, and I'm going to regret it, but I don't know. It's one of the unique features of the show. You can go on forever. So yesterday, I mentioned to keep in mind Pelosi's opposition, which is noted in this Hill article, and that's why I went all the way through it to the end. Cheney's opposition to putting Green on the Education Committee, Kinzinger's, yes. The speaker's opposition and how outraged she was, right? Now, what are they thinking? If thinking is even maybe too generous a word. Here's the floor proceedings from yesterday's pro forma session. They came in at 9 o'clock, pretty much on the dot, and the chaplain gave her invocation. It was, it's worthy of note, I guess. And then the business was the two resolutions naming all the rank and file members to their committees. So they came in at 9 o'clock. The whole session, the whole business was over at 9:03. That's how long it took. They had the prayer, and they passed the two resolutions, and it was all done by 9:03. So, but keeping in mind that Pelosi is on record and gave a whole press conference about how terrible it was, and that Liz Cheney is on record, et cetera, et cetera. Let me play you, maybe a minute or so of what's going on here. Here's we'll pick up at 9:02:42, if I can make this work correctly, with the speaker recognizing Liz Cheney for this resolution. Let's see. Oh, I might have to jump ahead here and do things this way. Okay, we're in the prayer here.
Pride. The chair lays before the House of Communication.
Okay, this probably won't
that the following named members be and are
go.
hereby elected to the following standing committees of the House.
This here is Congressman Brad Sherman offering the resolution naming the Democrats to their committees in H-Res 62. But since everything goes pretty quickly, we'll just play it from here. You can hear how both of these resolutions are handled.
Without objection, the objection, the reading is dispensed
Listen, Pelosi
with.
has the same problem I
Without
do.
objection, the resolution is adopted.
All right, now here we go.
And the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Wyoming seek recognition?
Well, we all know who the gentlewoman from Wyoming is. It's Liz Cheney. For what purpose does she seek recognition? Tell us, Liz, why?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the House Republican Conference, I send to the desk a privileged resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Resolution 63.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read.
Without objection, the reading is dispensed with.
There you go. So basically, now no one has seen the text of this thing, and no one has reported on the text of this thing. But here she is with HRes 63 and asks unanimous consent that it not be read aloud because, of course, well, one, no one cares, and two, it contains the name of Marjorie Taylor Greene being nominated to or assigned to the Education Committee. But no one objects, so no reading. And then further, what else does no one object to?
Without objection, the resolution is adopted and a motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Pursuant
That's it.
to Section 5A1.
That's actually all over.
House
At this
Resolution
point,
8, the House stands adjourned until 3 p.m. Monday, February 1st, 2021.
that's the end of it, just under one of the standing orders. Okay, they're done with the pro forma session, and they'll be back on, what did they say, Monday? Okay, so that was the whole thing, right? Now, Nancy Pelosi leaves this session and holds a press conference saying it's outrageous that they put Marjorie Taylor Greene on the Education Committee. Someone should have done something. How dare they? What were they thinking? Or were they even thinking? Is that too generous? You know, how does that get stopped? Brad Sherman or Nancy Pelosi or Liz Cheney could say, I object. And that's it. Now, what happens? Does it mean she can't be on the committee? No, it doesn't. It just means that in effect, on Monday, they'll come back and say, all right, instead of by doing this by unanimous consent, we now have to vote. And everybody's going to have to go on record. Democrats, I would assume, would be only too happy to be on record. Republicans, many of them would be happy to be on record. Some of them will be very reluctant. Liz Cheney would be sad. But, again, after, I don't know whether her comments, whether Cheney's comments in the Hill article come before or after, but does it really matter? She's directed to do this by the House Republican Conference, and she's already in trouble with the House Republican Conference and may lose her leadership position there because of her vote on impeachment. And it would surely seal her fate if she objected to this resolution or refused to offer this resolution or even entered into negotiations about the resolution to remove somebody's name without the agreement of the conference. So that's why she's not going to do it. But a Democrat could certainly have done it, and any Democrat could have done it. Now, they all went home because they weren't there to do it. They would say, I couldn't object. I wasn't there. I left Wednesday evening because I was told that there was just a pro forma session on Thursday, and then nothing on Friday, and then probably another pro forma session on Monday. And the first votes would be on Tuesday. So I left on Wednesday, and I'm not coming back until next Tuesday. Sorry, I wasn't there to object. Now, I don't know. I guess with remote voting and all the various options that they have, it's entirely possible that they could have objected from their district offices or from home, for that matter. But they didn't do it because, bottom line is they wanted to preserve an issue that they could beat up on Republicans with. And, maybe that's even the better strategic decision. To me, though, I'm primarily concerned with the fact that I still believe her to be primarily a security risk, plus also unfit to serve mentally on various levels. They see her as unfit to serve, true, but as a issue that they'd like to preserve. I am more fearful that the issue you want to preserve will kill you before you can make the most of the issue, and I think you ought to take that seriously. But there you go. I mean, on a very real level, it's annoying, to say the very least, that Nancy Pelosi leaves this session to go excoriate Republicans for not acting when she just presided over a unanimous consent request to do the thing she was excoriating them for. And I feel like they could have done better than that. Some people will think it's unnecessary and unfair to hold her accountable for that. And on some level, I understand where they're coming from. Okay, so let's see. In addition to the story about Marjorie Taylor Greene and the Hill, if you really wanted to stretch this story out, and now I'm getting annoyed with it, but I'll include for you in the roundup this report from Axios entitled "Scoop: GOP ignored its own early fears about Marjorie Taylor Greene." Basics of the story here: when she was in the primary, red flags, ironically enough, raised about her to the leadership, saying you really got to do something and disown this person and make sure that they don't win the primary. And I guess once she won the primary, what can you do to, if you can't defeat her, neutralize her when she gets here? And I guess we should say, to no one's surprise, Kevin McCarthy warned again about a very serious national security problem, does nothing. You know, I've been harping on this forever, that the real import of the taped conversation, which became famous because McCarthy blurts out that he thinks that Putin pays Trump, right? That the real import of that conversation was that the then Prime Minister of Ukraine has come to Washington, D.C. that day to meet with leadership, including Republican leadership in the House, and warn them about how dangerous Russia's active program of interference in democratic elections in Ukraine and across the West really is, and that they need to do something, and they need to be standing with Ukraine in their actual hot shooting war fight against Russia over their occupation of Crimea and the Donbas region as well. And that all of this sails over McCarthy's head. Everybody else in the room, dumb as they are, knows that that's the crux of the conversation. And McCarthy not only doesn't understand it, but derails it with the stupid comment, which might even be true, but certainly from a political standpoint, stupid comment about Trump and Putin, and that's what becomes famous in this thing. And even impeaching Donald Trump based on his Ukraine scheme didn't bring this conversation and its real importance back to the fore. So, I don't know, pretty amazing. But to tie it to what's happening now, the warning is given. Marjorie Taylor Greene will pose a major problem for your party that you're going to have to deal with, and you should deal with it early. And if you don't, you're going to have a real problem. But at least if you know about it ahead of time, you can plan on what to do. And once again, the whole thing sails over his head, and the Republican Party is saddled with another problem that Kevin McCarthy had the opportunity to deal with when it was nothing, and he effed right off, and now you're dealing with it, and this guy should not be your leader. Not that I really want to help them clean house and get a better leader in there. That would just be a problem. Again, reminds me of, I must have told you this story at some point, that my brother's father-in-law told about his experiences in Vietnam. Do you remember this one, where he is new to a unit that he's been assigned to and eager to show the commanding officer that he can be of help? He arrives and the unit is not pinned down, but is under pressure from sniper fire that comes from a nearby hill. And they warn him about it, and just be careful because there's a sniper out there. He's not particularly good, but he is out there, and he offers to, I'll volunteer for this. I'll go up around the hill and approach it from the back and try to clear this sniper out. And his commanding officer says, no, don't do that. If you do that, then the Viet Cong will send another sniper to replace him, and that sniper might be good. We'd rather have the crappy sniper up there. So I guess we're in a little bit of the same position here. So, do you want to sweep out Kevin McCarthy, or you want to keep the Republicans saddled with his ineffective leadership? On the other hand, his ineffective leadership causes problems for us all. So I guess we could evaluate it that way. All right, let's see. Moving on. Other things. Something else one thing you should be aware of that came to my attention yesterday, and then I ended up not being able to shoehorn it in. Who gave me the heads up on this one? Let me scroll back a little bit. It was Rebecca Romans. Yeah. We did get one of her suggestions on the air, John Aravosis's thread, but she also lets us know that Senator Mark Warner, my own Virginia Senator Mark Warner, is currently in quarantine after a coronavirus exposure, which, may pose a problem, given that, again, that it's a 50-50 evenly divided Senate. I'm not real sure what what the current Senate rules are about proxy voting or vote matching or remote voting. So some real possibility that that could cause a problem. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if they were willing to adopt rules similar to how the House deals with things, given that it's 50-50, and it's as likely as not that a Republican, perhaps even more likely, given their stance on things, that a Republican might similarly be exposed to coronavirus and be forced into quarantine. So, but I'll have to check that out. It's a good question. Anyway, I just wanted you to be up to date on who's got coronavirus or who's quarantining and who doesn't. He keeps testing negative, but he's got to wait. So we'll see how that goes. And of course, by the beginning of the week after next, we're into trial time for the Trump impeachment. So I think he'll be out of quarantine by that point. But anyway, you got to keep an eye on everybody. What else have we got here to share? Some interesting reporting in Salon. And is this the same thing, or it's two articles, one and a follow-up? This is just an interesting thing. I don't know that we'll spend our time on it today, but something you might want to read for the weekend. Roger Sullenberger with this interesting piece, and then a follow-up. Mark Meadows, remember him? Chief of Staff over at the White House. Mark Meadows performed life-changing favors for Madison Cawthorn, that jerk that everybody is annoyed with. Who I remember him. You know who I'm talking about. I didn't gear my staff around legislating. I did it around communications. Anyway, life-changing favors for Madison Cawthorn. Then turned on him. Why is the question, and some of the answer is here in this piece, and then the follow-up, the subheader of this piece. Former North Carolina congressman and younger man who replaced him have a long history. Somehow it went south. And, it's a little vague, right? Like, oh, what kind of history do they have? Is this really something that we should be discussing or not? Well, anyway, the mystery, I think, is solved by the follow-up piece. And to some extent, this piece discusses it. But the headline of the follow-up piece from Roger here, Mark Meadows' money woes. He liquidated as much as $200,000 in stock after the election. Meadows came to Congress as one of the wealthiest new members, and his current financial distress is mysterious. Now, between the two of these articles, what they unravel here is that, well, if you come to Congress as a very wealthy person and you leave with some serious financial worries and you're liquidating stock and all that, that's all worrisome all by itself. Who is your financial advisor is the sort of thing you might ask about someone in this situation. And what if I told you that his financial advisor is Madison Cawthorn's dad? Would that surprise you? Probably shouldn't. I mean, they're both from North Carolina. But I guess that explains hey, how is it that you had such a good relationship with this kid that you performed life-changing favors for him? And I don't know what those favors are, but I do know that the very, very thin resume of Madison Cawthorn, I mean, so thin that the only actual paid work experience that he had before coming to Congress, and I know we're not supposed to knock people for this kind of experience, but it was working at Chick-fil-A. That's it, honestly. Now, he says he's an independent businessman and he's a real estate investor. He started his own real estate investment company. But again, that reported zero income and zero employees. And also, by the way, was named SPQR Holdings or whatever. And, we're reminded what SPQR is. It in the modern context. Basically, it's another one of those wink-wink nods at white supremacist beliefs. But, yes, it's the old Roman phrase, and it was on their banners, and I don't know what the Latin was, but, stood for, the translation, as I recall, was, Senate and People of Rome. It was on their banners of like, this is our authority. This is the authority by which we're about to slaughter you people and make you subject to the Roman Empire. And somehow, whatever, blah, 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 it became white supremacist. Like Vikings. Apparently, what the hell do they have to do with white supremacy? I don't know, but I made it up, and I think Vikings are cool. And so are Romans. They had awesome helmets. and nice banners. They loved, fascist ideology at some point, I guess, under the imperial Rome, and we love it. And they were white, so that's enough for us. Madison Cawthorn doesn't sound Italian, but hey, you never know. Okay, so anyway, you got that to read up on, and I'm excited to read how did Madison Cawthorn's family possibly screw Mark Meadows out of lots of money. That would be awesome to learn about, but maybe it was just plain bad investments, and he didn't steal all the money, though I kind of would like that at this point. Let's see. Other things that we need to tell you about. The investigation in the press continues into the January 6th insurrection, even if the inquiry in Congress is stalling ahead of the impeachment trial. And we have yet to see whether or not the impeachment inquiry will lead to this sort of investigation. But anyway, the newspaper's now catching up with things. The Washington Post with a story the other day. Self-styled militia members in 3 states began planning in November for recruits and weapons ahead of the Capitol breach. The U.S. alleges that would be, of course, U.S. attorneys who are prosecuting these cases. And just more evidence of advanced planning and advanced knowledge of exactly what was going to be going on there and the nature of what was going to be going on there after the Trump rally speeches. So no, not that spontaneous, not spontaneous at all. That in combination with the video presentation from the Wall Street Journal about the role of the Proud Boys in the attack. Also, by the way, the Oath Keepers and 3%ers who showed up. The Oath Keepers, I noticed, reported to have been providing a security detail for Roger Stone on January 5th ahead of the rally, and then some security, I guess, at the rally as well. But security for Roger Stone, which I found interesting given the fact that the White House felt no need for any additional security during the actual attack, but Roger Stone thought he needed security the day before the attack. It's just that much weirder that the White House didn't seem to want to follow any of the normal security protocols. All right, let's see. What else have I got here? Oh, yes, right. More. This was the origin, the early tweets about the origin of Marjorie Taylor Greene's Jewish space laser conspiracy. But we've covered that one, I think. Also of some interest in terms of investigating into planning ahead of time, the work of ProPublica writers Logan Jaffe and Jack Gillum, writing this story yesterday, headline being, quote, "This is war. Inside the secret chat where far-right extremists devised their post-Capitol plans." Interesting. So speaks to the issue of it being an ongoing insurrection and conspiracy. Well worth your time over the weekend as well. Let's see. Commentary from New York Magazine. This would be a good companion piece here to our discussion with Ellie earlier. Eric Levitz writing, "The Democrats' civil war over the filibuster has barely begun," illustrated with a photo of Chuck Schumer and a composite photo, Chuck Schumer and Joe Manchin here. So giving some color and nuance to exactly what the issues may be in bringing around a united Democratic front on this, both with Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin as holdouts here. So, we should look into that and spend some time with that article as well. Probably something we could have done on the air here, but I'll do my best to round up a couple more stories for you to consider over the weekend. Let's see. Anything else that we should add to this? I want to also add to your roundup of reading Mark Sumner's piece from 2 days ago now. I never. Oh, actually, it's from all the way from back in January 23rd, so a little older than I thought. And I always hate these kind of headline constructions. But okay, It's a topic we want to read about. Trump's second impeachment is about more than you think. And whenever Mark is writing it, it's entirely possible that it is about more than you think, even if you are, let's say, a regular listener to the show and think you're pretty up to date and up to speed on all of the issues. It's a pretty good bet that if Mark thinks it might be about something more than you think, it really is. So I would recommend that too for weekend reading. I wish I had taken the time already to go through it so I could highlight what some of those extra things are, but it was not to be. All right, let's see. One last thing I will spend a minute or two on the show, because where else are you going to get it covered? I have, in addition to the slight correction yesterday about the rules of committee assignments in the Senate, that there is, again, the competing theory that Senate committees, as well as the Senate itself, is a continuing body, and that therefore senators who were just reelected but used to be on the education or whatever committee would continue to be on that committee without being reappointed to it. Very weak theory in my view. But it looks like they're not going to bother challenging anything, because I guess they're getting ready to hammer out the organizing resolution after all. But I guess if it lingers any longer than this, people are just going to have to force the issue and try and grab hold of these gavels. But another wrinkle in the history of this, even the history that I've covered of it, but I remember thinking at the time, oh, well, I've seen this move from McConnell before, definitely, where he filibusters or threatens to filibuster the organizing resolution. And I think I mentioned that it happened twice before with McConnell, that the first time was in the transition into the 110th Congress after the 2006 elections, where control moves from Republican to Democratic in the Senate, and he threatens to filibuster the organizing resolution because it's an evenly divided Senate now, or nearly evenly. I was 51-49, and then Senator Tim Johnson is in the hospital, and McConnell ghoulishly says in December, maybe I can capitalize on this, and I'll filibuster the organizing resolution if Johnson's still in the hospital and it looks like he might not recover. I'll filibuster the organizing resolution and try and force an even division on the committees if he's not going to be able to show up to vote to establish a floor majority for the Democrats and overwhelm me in some other way. Even though, quite honestly, at that time, he might very well have just relied on the ability to filibuster and the lack of an understanding among the bulk of the Democratic caucus at the time that they could have overcome that filibuster with a majority vote. Or it could be that, in fact, Democrats did have that understanding and knew it very well in 2006 and early 2007 that this was an option available to them, but didn't want to advertise that it was available to them because then they would be pressured to do it. That also takes us back to Eli Zupnik and what he's doing with the Fix Our Senate campaign. One of the key elements in bringing Democrats, reluctant Democrats, around on the question of majority cloture was giving activist citizens enough of an understanding that they couldn't simply be brushed off with the excuse that, no, that's not the way it works. We can't change the rules without 67 votes. So what you're talking about is completely ridiculous. Once everybody finally came to understand that that wasn't true anymore, Democrats in 2013 finally did do something about it. Well, anyway, so that's important all by itself. But a side observation to what I was going to say, which is that McConnell comes back and tries to pull the same thing in a really incongruous situation, what seems like it shouldn't work, in the beginning of the 111th Congress, when control of the Senate swings very much more in Democrats' favor. And in fact, I guess by the time this comes around, Democrats are holding on to, eventually they're supposed to be entitled to 60 seats in the Senate in that year. But you'll recall, of course, one, that Senator Kennedy was ill and not very often available for votes, and two, that there was a challenge from then incumbent Norm Coleman in Minnesota to Al Franken's election. And remember how long they dragged that out, by the way. And keep that in mind because, Democrats could absolutely have done the same thing to members of the House this time around, but opted not to. But they challenged Franken's ability to be seated for months just to drag things out and to deny Democrats the extra votes. Well, anyway, when control was swinging from 51 seats to 60 seats, the Democrats sought to change the committee allocations there, and McConnell threatened to filibuster the organizing resolution anyway, because he didn't want them to take extra seats. And at that point, things were even more different. And of course, at that point, Democrats said, go ahead and filibuster. It was that election where they were more public about it, and where I was discussing this with them more publicly. Let them go ahead and filibuster because the committees right now have a majority of Democrats on them. And no matter how you interpret whether or not newly elected senators should be sitting or not, the advantage is even greater than what you're pressing for right now. It was interesting to watch, but interesting to see that it was worth holding up Franken to deny them the 60th vote for cloture.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
I don't know if that's entirely clear. You know that they were trying to deny them the cloture ability to invoke cloture on the Affordable Care Act, but did you know that they were denying them the ability to invoke cloture on an organizing resolution just by challenging Franken? What were they doing dragging that out for 6 months? It never made sense, right? Wow. Well, stay tuned. Justice is up next. See you Monday.